You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brennan Weissel.
Tim Jane.
Michael Howes, and this week we had on Terps Baseball senior captain starting shortstop Kevin Keister. I know you've probably been asked this question a million times. I've asked you it too, but captain now, your senior year, just kind of what did that mean to you to be able to get that number 3 jersey and hold that role?
Yeah, it means everything to me. I love Maryland. I love this place. I love all the coaches, Swope, Tom, Poss, and Jimmy, and all those guys, and all my teammates and everything. So it's definitely an honor that they voted and thought that I should wear number 3 this year.
And that was something that you had been looking forward to, kind of a goal for yourself to get that role, right?
Yeah, I always wanted it, but when you got guys like Schlegler and Bubba and all those guys on your team, you just got to wait your turn. And I waited till my senior year, but it was definitely a goal of mine to wear.
You've definitely seen Maryland baseball totally progress from the time that you decided to commit here until now, and just the Big Ten championships and making it and hosting a regional. Is that something you kind of expected coming into Maryland, and how much excitement did that bring you when you guys finally reached them and kind of have been on this path?
Yeah, the recruiting class above me with Ryan Ramsey and Nick Dean and Zamarzlak and Treffler and all those guys, we knew were pretty good. And then my recruiting class with Shaw and Nigel and Luke and Savical and all those guys, we knew it was pretty good too. So we expected to win kind of when we stepped foot on campus, and maybe not as much as we did, with hosting a regional and back-to-back Big Tens and all that. But we definitely expected to win as soon as we got here.
When I read Mike's article about you and Swope, there was a part in there about how you guys had some back and forth about your swing. What were those conversations like, and what exactly was it that he wanted you to work on, in terms of changing your swing?
Yeah, my freshman year, I didn't do too well. The beginning of my sophomore year, the first 2 weekends I didn't play. I was kind of set in stone on what I wanted to do, and Swope and had a different idea. He wanted me to hit for a little more power. I was okay with hitting singles. I'm glad I eventually was like, I need to change something and hit for a little more power. And ultimately, him and Tom kind of changed my career around when it came to that. And I have the utmost respect for them pushing me and not, just giving up on me at that point. But I was very hard-headed and set in stone on how I wanted to hit, and I didn't want to listen to him to begin my college career. But that relationship has obviously changed, and I'm glad I eventually was like, come on, you need to do something different here.
Was Swope's work with motor preferences and working with hitters, was that something that was pitched to you on your recruiting visit?
No, that didn't come along till kind of last summer, going into my junior year was the first time it was introduced to me. That was something that was new. I had no idea what it was until about last fall.
How much I know this might be but when, Vaughn left, can you kind of take us through that moment? Like, what was the team group chat? Did you guys know? Did you find out via socials? Like, what happened there?
Yeah, well, what we found out on a Zoom. We were scheduled to go on Zoom I think it was a week or so after we got back from Wake Forest, and right before we were going to go on the Zoom, we saw kind of a tweet that said that he took the job at Alabama. And I know that's not the way he wanted us to find out, but we had a Zoom schedule, but ultimately we found out from a tweet.
So what was the reaction? Like, were you,
it wasn't, we weren't necessarily surprised. SEC is kind of where a lot of people want to end up, coaching and playing and doing all those things. Obviously, the the money down there is different, but just the atmosphere and the experience you get from that, we weren't necessarily surprised by that move at all.
So then, did you kind of have an idea once he left that Swope was pretty much, and were the players advocating for Swope? Like, did Damon ever ask you guys, like, hey, like, what are your guys' thoughts? Or was it always kind of a lock that he'd be the pick?
No, Damon never asked us, but we had a feeling that Swope was going to take over. I mean, he was the perfect guy for the job. It wouldn't have made sense if it wasn't him. So, we kind of knew that Swope was going to take over.
I think we've seen it so much now, especially with the transfer portal. When coaches leave, that often means that players do too. Is that something you ever considered leaving College Park?
No, me and Swope have a really good relationship, and like I stated before, I love this place. I love being here. I wanted to wear 3, be the captain here. So maybe for split second, I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to explore my options, but then like I never really gave it a real thought. I always wanted to stay here and be here, especially with Swope's first year, just kind of have a guy that's been around for a while that could help him out in the locker room or whatever he needs. I wanted to do that for Swope because of our relationship.
You mentioned it earlier, but the SEC and the Big Ten, for people, I think, some people know, but for people who are in the game, what is the biggest differences between like the Big Ten conference per se and then like the SEC and the ACC? Because, it's damn near impossible to host a regional. I mean, you guys won the Big Ten and won the tournament last year, and they still were like, nah, like, you don't get a regional. What
Yeah,
what what do you think it is, the gap between the conferences?
I think, and this is not, dissing any Big Ten teams that miss the tournament or finish lower or whatever. I think the SEC is just deeper. So when you look at Ole Miss, who we played last year, and they beat us in the series, their RPI was still in the top 100 or whatever it was. But when you look at a Big Ten team who is lower in the pack, their RPI is lower than that. They play all these high RPI teams, and they're just deeper than the Big Ten or other conferences. So when you look at it like that, I think that's why winning those outer conference series and all that stuff is so important when it comes to RPI and stuff. Where the SEC gets their RPI in conference, they have so many weekends where they can just make it up. Playing on the road obviously is big for RPI, and you're doing that every other week in the SEC. So, I think it's just a deeper all around conference than, the Big Ten or other conferences like ours.
What was the reaction from the team last year where you guys win the Big Ten tournament, but then not only do you not host, but then you're slated to go to Wake Forest? There had to be some disappointment and frustration there with the committee, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to say that, we'll go anywhere and play anyone and do all that stuff. We thought it was kind of disrespectful that they put us in Wake Forest Regional. We thought we could have gone somewhere else. Maybe even hosted. Our RPI probably wasn't good enough, but we thought that maybe we could have ended up somewhere else. But that's just the cards we were dealt.
Talking about when you guys hosted a regional, though, just how cool was that to be able to play in front of a packed Bob, even with bleachers in the outfield as well? Just what was that experience like?
It was awesome. I still talk about one of my favorite memories from that regional is the national anthem from the first game when everyone in the stands screams the O during the national anthem. It was really loud, and I'm not even an Orioles fan, but I thought that was really cool for people at Maryland and people who love Maryland sports and all that stuff. I thought it was a very cool experience, kind of emotional. It was pretty awesome hosting a regional. We the whole season we kind of knew that we had the chance to, and it's always nice playing at home and doing all those things, but being one of those top 16 teams in the country, it was awesome to be able to experience that.
Do you still think about that play at first base?
So yeah, I think about that all the time. I wish it wasn't called. You never know what could have happened after that, but when I think we would have been down 1 or 1 at that time, if I'm correct, with 1 out, Bubba on first, who had 20 bags that year, and Nicky Lowe up to bat, who we all know is a really good hitter. So you never know what would have happened, but in an alternate universe, there's Bubba's called safe, and we're headed to a super regional. So I do think about it, but that's obviously 2 years ago, so it doesn't hurt as bad as it did then.
You just kind of mentioned some of the, facilities when they put in the bleachers in the regional. Obviously baseball's getting a kind of a new indoor practice facility, but you're never going to see it. Has that been something that like people knew was coming, and then how do you feel that you're not going to get to maybe experience it?
Yeah, I mean, we've been told that we were going to get it for a while now. That was kind of a recruiting pitch for me in high school. So it's actually nice that they're breaking ground on it. That you finally get to see that it's going to be up at some point. I don't really care that I'm not going to get to experience it. I'll hit in the shell or whatever cage we're hitting in, but I just think it's funny that that was my recruiting pitch kind of when I was in high school. So it's nice that it'll actually be up at some point. That's actually a real thing that's going to happen.
It's like the purple line for athletes. Says it's going to be up in 2023. 4 years later, it's still constructing.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to, when we talk about the SEC and the Big Ten differences too, no offense to your guy, the facility right now, but like, when back in high school, like there's been nicer hitting cages that I've seen. And I think
Yeah.
the facilities at the SEC kind of blow those away. For people who haven't been inside, can you describe it and like just how far do you think you guys are lagging behind the rest of the country maybe when it comes to those type of things?
Yeah, well, our setup right now is it used to be a weight room. We threw kind of like some turf in the weight room, put a batting cage in there. We split it up with a screen in the middle, so it's technically one batting cage, but we use it both ways. Machine on one side, flips on the other. That's kind of how it's set up in there. It's a old weight room that no one uses that we kind of just threw together. Um, I think if you look at it that way, we could be lacking behind in that area, but like some recruits might want the nicer things that the SEC or the ACC or other schools have that maybe we don't, but um like it's all about what you want. I wanted a good hitting coach that's going to help me develop, and I'm sure a bunch of other recruits want that too. So it's kind of about what you want in that aspect when it comes to the facilities. Do you want nice facilities or do you want premier coaching? Not to say the SEC isn't premier coaching, but there's a lot of development done at Maryland and other schools that might not have nicer things. So, it's kind of about what you want as a player. And, a lot of guys are fine with the cage in the weight room because we have such a good hitting coach.
You mentioned the development. I don't remember the exact number of people that got drafted last year. I think it was like 6 or 7, but that's obviously a big recruiting pitch. And how much have you like kind of stayed in contact with the guys who have gone to the MLB? And is that something you see for yourself in the future?
Yeah, I obviously want to play professional baseball. I think that's what a lot of college baseball players want to do. Luke and Bubba and Nigel, they're 3 of my good friends, so I talk to them very often. Nicky Lowe, I talk to very often. Shaw, actually, he in spring training he played against my dad, who's coaching for the AAA Royals. So they talked a little bit. I texted him about that. He was texting me back. So, I still keep in contact with them, and they're all wishing me luck. I'm wishing them luck. They're rooting for me. Last year on draft day after they all got picked, they were texting me like looking out for you, all that stuff. So, they're my good friends, and they will be like that for a long time. And hopefully at some point we cross paths again in professional baseball or life or whatever it is, but they'll always be my good friends.
Have you thought about a 5th year potentially?
I'm actually out of eligibility this year. I do not get the COVID 5th year because that was when I was in high school. So this is kind of my last year.
You just mentioned your dad. Have you thought about what it would be like to maybe play for him, or like, is that something you guys have talked about? what are your general thoughts on that? And, like, if you could put it together, is that something you'd want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind playing for my dad. I wouldn't want it to be looked at like he's only there because his dad's in that organization type of thing. But obviously, um, I would love playing for my dad. He's a very smart baseball guy. Obviously, he's my dad, so I love him. But he is also a very good baseball guy. So yeah, no, I'd love to play for him.
Out of those guys that left last year, what's your best off the field, like or on the field story? So LaRusso, Shaw, Savicle, whatever it may be.
I don't know. We have a lot of good memories. We every Sunday we'd sit on our couch from 1 o'clock till 11 o'clock, whenever the late game would end, and watch NFL together. We'd watch all the college basketball March Madness games. Those are the times you really, you know, um, you cherish and you enjoy, because you're kind of just hanging out outside of baseball. Obviously all the on-field memories are cool too. Nicky Lowe's walk-off in the Big Ten tournament last year and all that stuff's pretty cool. But they're uh they're all cool guys off the field that when you hang out with them, it's a blast. So watching football, just hanging out, cracking jokes, whatever it is, there's probably some stories that I have that I can't tell that are pretty funny. But you know, no, they were a blast to be around. I have so many memories that I can't really just name one of them.
What are the teams who are the baseball boys rocking with?
For football. So
NFL wise.
I'm a Cowboys fan. Um, Nicky Lowe's a Broncos fan. Luke's a Giants fan. Um, we had some Eagles fans the past couple of years. Bubba, Orlando, Hine, they were all huge Eagles fans. They're all from Jersey and Philly, so they love them some Philly sports. But we had a mix. We had a mix. A lot of
Brownies?
NFC East in my personal room, so that got ugly sometimes. But
No Ravens?
Jay Gabor is probably the biggest Ravens fan I know. So
Is Swope a Ravens guy? And I know he's a big O's guy.
who's that?
Whoa.
Swope?
Yeah.
No, he's a Commanders fan.
Okay.
Do you have any favorite stories from growing up with your dad in the Nats organization, being around those guys?
Yeah, I mean, there was one week that I was visiting him, and Anthony Rendon was hurt, and he was there for that entire week. That was pretty cool because I always hit in the last group, and the hurt guys always hit in the last group for BP. So I was actually for a week taking BP with Anthony Rendon, which was pretty awesome. But there's a bunch of players that he's had that I have a bunch of good memories with. I was always kind of around them and somewhat close in age to them. So I've made some good memories with a lot of his players.
Do you stay connected with any of them still?
I used to, not as much anymore. Sometimes they'll reach out to me or my dad, asking about how I'm doing, asking all that stuff about baseball and life and all that stuff. But when he was with the Nats, it used to be I used to text him or stuff a little more. But now that he's moved to like the Rangers and the Royals, and I haven't been around all those guys as much, I don't really know those guys. I just kind of don't talk to him as much.
Kind of switching to this year's team now. We're recording this after Sam Honar's walk-off against UMBC. It was a 12th comeback win. What is it about this team that makes you guys just come through in those late game situations?
I think it's confidence. We always talk about passing the bat. So when we get in those late innings, we're not trying to do too much. We're just trying to hand it off to the person behind us. So when you look at it, Chris came up and he had that kind of nub off the end of his bat, but it scored a run. And then Eddie came up and was 2 strikes, had a couple good takes, pitch clock violation, and ended up walking. So like that's our idea of just kind of passing the bat. We're not trying to, obviously you want to hit the walk off and be the one that hits the walk off homer or single, whatever it is. But when you're in that box, you're just kind of trying to get on base for the person behind you. And I know that's what Chris was trying to do, and B Mart and Eddie and Nardi when he led off the inning with a 1-out walk. And I know that's what those guys are trying to do, because that's what we preach. It's kind of passing that bat. So I think that's why we've been so successful in the late innings.
Do you think the opposing teams might get a little bit of jitters because they know how proficient you guys are in those scenarios? Because it seems like every time Maryland just comes through.
Yeah, I think when you get late game and it's kind of a close game and there's runners on base, there's kind of always those jitters when you're playing defense. You're like, oh man, like I hope this kid doesn't get a hit, and there's always those jitters in baseball. So when we play teams, I don't know if they know how many late inning comebacks we've had or walk offs we've had or whatever. But when you get late game like that and it's close game and there's runners on base, there's always a little jitter. So I definitely think it's their teams probably get a little nervous, but that's probably normal.
I got one more, and I read that it's no secret that last year's pitching wasn't up to par in terms of kind of the program standards you set, and you even said that you think that pitching it had to be better, basically.
Yeah.
Do you think that this year, I mean, obviously it's improved, right? Like I think you're the number 1 ERA in the Big Ten. Do you think or number 3 now? Do you think it's capable of performing to the level it needs to be once you guys get to tournament play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a much deeper staff than we did last year. And when we got to the Big Ten tournament, our pitching was lights out. So I have all the confidence in the world. We've had probably this last week hasn't been great. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then yesterday it hasn't been great. But everyone struggles sometimes. I have a lot of confidence in our pitchers, especially our starters. So I'm not really worried about them at all after this past week, and I think we're much deeper than we were last year, and we still threw really well last year at the end of the season. So I think they're going to hit their stride again here, and hopefully this weekend. And I have all the confidence in them.
Who's the grossest pitcher you ever faced
Maryland or in general?
in general? Did you guys get Rhett Lauder last year or no?
Yeah, we got Rhett. He's definitely cool. He's definitely up there. Brecht was pretty good. My freshman year, Ohio State had Seth Lonsway. He was one that spun a curveball like I've never seen before. It was the first time I've ever really seen a curveball with that much spin to it. That it looked like a fastball. And next thing you know, it's in the dirt. There's a lot of pitchers. The one that always, and a lot of people don't know this, and I think one day he's going to pitch in the big leagues, is inter squads against Nigel Belgrave was also very hard to hit off of when he's throwing 94 with a sinker and a slider at 85 that moves a foot. Like he was pretty impossible. I'd never figured it out. I never got a hit off of him in my 3 years of facing him. So I would probably say Rhett Lauder is probably the best one. He was filthy against us.
You did some pitching in high school too. Did you have a favorite pitch you threw?
My changeup. I love throwing changeups in high school. I don't know. There's something about it. I just
Circle?
I love throwing my changeup, pulling the string.
Were you a circle guy or were you like
No, I was a circle guy. Yeah, I was a circle guy.
Basketball, pitching, hitting? Kevin Keister does it all, including showing up on Under the Shell podcast. Thanks again, Kevin. We really appreciate your time. Good luck with the rest of the season, man.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
And that was a great talk with Kevin Keister, but the baseball team has been on a little bit of a downward spiral recently. They're 2-5 in their last 7 games. We're recording this on Tuesday night, right after Georgetown beat them 13-12, and it's not been looking pretty for them the past few weeks. There's been some offensive struggles. It's been looking pretty sporadic, and the pitching's kind of gone downhill a little bit since the start of the season.
Mike, you were at the game in Georgetown. What did you see? What went wrong?
I saw a great offensive performance. Chris Akopian had a home run in the first inning. Sam Honar had 2 3-run home runs in the game. That was spoiled by some poor relief pitching. They were up by 5 heading into the bottom of the 6th inning, and then they gave up 8 runs between the 6th and the 7th, and they just couldn't get out of that hole. Sam Honar hit a 3-run bomb in the 8th to bring them within 1, but it was a little too late. Couldn't really string anything together in the bottom of the 9th. It was actually a 1-2-3 inning in the 9th inning.
Do you think that the pitching, is it a lack of depth or is it just a lack of high-end talent?
Depth is certainly hurting right now. They had some arms coming into the season that they expected to have a big role. James Gladden transferred from VCU. He had Tommy John right before the season started. He was going to have a pretty big role in the bullpen. Garrett French transferred from Rutgers. He's been in a bunch of collegiate games. He was expected to be a big part of the bullpen. He also is injured right now. He hasn't played since March. And then you have Tristan Sarcone transfer from Dartmouth. He was supposed to be another pretty big piece in that bullpen. And just last Wednesday against UMBC, he hurt his elbow. Still no update on what's going on there, but he's out. So they have a lot of young, inexperienced pitchers in that bullpen, which is kind of hurting them. However, Evan Smith did toss 3 1/3 scoreless innings today against Georgetown, but the other guys couldn't really back him up after he exited in the 5th.
I mean, I kind of wish we'd been talking to Jimmy Jackson this week because now there's way more questions for him about the pitching. Mike, what do you do at this point?
You got to stick with the same guys. Kenny Lippman, Logan Keister, Joey McManus. McManus has been pretty strong for a freshman starter on Sundays, but Lippman, he started off the season strong. His ERA has gone up recently. Keister, he started off really strong. He was honestly probably the best pitcher on the team starting on Saturday. His ERA has gone up. So you still got to see. I mean, it's a 60-game season. There's ebbs and flows. There's going to be ups and downs. So those are two guys with a lot of college experience. Lippman, guy who's been all sorts of roles. He's been in the bullpen last year, starting this year. Keister started for GW, so they don't really have a lot of options. All 3 of their starters from last year, Savakul, Nick Dean, Kyle McCoy, they're not pitching this year. 2 of them were drafted. 1 of them is out for the season. So in this transition year, they kind of just got to stick to what they have and hope it kind of works itself out.
I want to revisit the things we talked about at the beginning of the season, Mike, some of the over-unders, because I think it is kind of interesting to look at now. The first question I asked you was over-under Matt Swope ejections. How are we looking on that?
We've got 1 so far. There's been moments where I thought it's going to get to 2 and it was going to beat that over-under, but not yet. Okay. He had a little moment today where he got into the umps' faces, but not yet. But I think we'll reach that mark.
Yeah, I did. I also asked if this team had a over/under 0.5. Freshman of the year caliber players. I think they might be at 1 or 2, right? I mean, Chris Hakopian seems like the Indiana pitcher's up there too, but Chris Hakopian seems like he's kind of right at the thick of things for that award. But would you agree?
I would say Chris Hakopian is pretty damn close to being at the top, if not the top right now. He leads the team in home runs. One of the best with batting average. Always seems to come up for them. I don't see how, if the season ended today, he's the Big Ten Freshman of the Year.
Now, on the other hand, I can't remember, did I say 3.5 or 4.5 for guys hitting over 300?
I think you said 4.5.
Yeah, well, and you said over, and that's a yikes so far. We only got, looking at it right now, 3 guys who are hitting above 300, and then Braden Martin is your 5th best hitter at 268. Do you think that could change down the stretch, or do you think that the hitting's kind of underwhelmed a little bit? I mean, you got players like Elijah Lambros. I think we all expected him to take a huge leap, and it really hasn't. His on-base percentage is pretty 360. His OPS is 805. That's not even talking about the batting average. That hasn't really been as good. You were really high on Devin Russell. He hasn't panned out very well. Calarco, 216 with a .724 OPS. Do you think that any of those guys are going to get to that level that we talked about preseason?
Devin Russell's definitely been struggling. And they've had Calarco, He started today. He started last week. They kind of did a three-catcher rotation last week where they had Charlie Glenn and Devin Russell and Calarco each start a game. But I think Calarco's going to cement himself in that catch role by the end of the season.
And then I want to follow up on that last question, and we can move off of baseball. I'm going to amend it a little bit. What are this team's chances of making the NCAA tournament as it stands right now?
So it's important to remember they have had a little bit of not the greatest past few weeks, but they are still 22-11. They play UMBC tomorrow. They did have a close game against UMBC last week, but UMBC isn't that good. I expect a wider margin with that game. Then they go up to Northwestern for this weekend. Northwestern is 0-6 in the Big Ten. So if there was a time to get right, it would be this upcoming weekend against Northwestern. After that, it is a struggle to get into the postseason. They play JMU in a midweek. That's 24th in RPI. They have Nebraska, who's ranked, who's top 20 in RPI. Illinois, 69th. Rutgers, 54th. Boston College, 38th. And then they ended on a little bit of a cupcake with Penn State. So there are some challenges ahead. But right now, as we're recording, their RPI is at 32. 22-11. I would say if the season ended today, they're in.
When the season ends, are they in? Mid-season prediction from Michael.
It could come down to the Big Ten tournament. If they have a couple iffy series coming up, they can't really afford to lose anymore. They lost Michigan. Michigan's not that strong of an opponent.
Yeah.
They beat them, but you can't say Michigan's that strong of an opponent. Indiana, I get. Indiana's very good. Indiana had high preseason expectations. They played a tough non-conference schedule, but they can't be losing a series to Illinois. They can't be dropping games to Penn State. They can't
lose to Georgetown.
Against JMU is going to be huge. They beat JMU during spring break, but if they want a resume booster, that's one. A team in the Sun Belt Conference, a team with a high RPI. That's a game they should be looking towards.
And Mike, you guys mentioned it, Northwestern for the baseball team, Northwestern also for the softball team this upcoming weekend. Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the softball team, Northwestern generally has a pretty good softball program. We've seen it, in years past, they've been really good. But the softball, I think, as we've continuously talked about, I mean, what are realistic expectations for this team, right? Like, it's Lauren Karn's first year. I think just picking up a game or two every series is probably, what you're looking for if you're Karn, right? I mean, obviously, you'd like to have, some sweeps or some series wins, but that's two straight series where they've, went 1-2. That's what happened against Illinois. And Courtney Weish is basically, and when Courtney Weish pitches, they have a chance. So I would expect probably a 1-2 weekend. Weish win, 2 losses beyond that.
If Maryland could only clone Courtney Weish, they'd probably be in pretty good shape. And like you said, 2 weeks in a row now, winning game 1 and then losing game 2 and 3. But once again, it's 1-run games. Second game against Illinois, and I believe it was the third game against Penn State, were 1-run games. So, I have to imagine that those are just frustrating positions to be in when you're a team that's trying to basically steal series at this point.
Yeah, let's just stay with the topic of the Purple Wildcats and talk about the women's lacrosse team. Probably the most anticipated game of the weekend, I would say. And they fell to Northwestern in kind of just a disappointing loss, right? I mean, the defense of the Wildcats just dominated, forcing turnovers constantly, and they turned that into offense. Maryland allowed 17 goals, their season low, and it just, Northwestern, from wire to wire, it felt like they were in control. That's the first road win against Kathy Reese's squad, I think. I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it's Northwestern.
It was Big Ten home games that she was
Big Ten home games.
No longer.
For Northwestern to come in there and win. I know Maryland still has a path to the Big Ten title. I was looking at the standings, but that race feels kind of, especially with just how dominant that win was. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Sam. I pretty much knew that game was over within the first 5 minutes. And the reason I say that is it's because I mentioned it to you guys on the podcast last week. When Maryland had let up more than 10 goals, they'd lost. And, there were only 2 examples of that. But it was pretty clear once Northwestern scored 5 goals, I think, in the first quarter, maybe 4 goals in the first couple minutes there, that it was going to be really difficult for Maryland offensively to hang with Northwestern. And so I felt that unless Maryland was going to score 15 goals, which, they would have needed 18 goals to win that game, at some point it gets out of hand. And so the final score is a little bit inflated. We see that all the time. But at some point in the first quarter, you could just look at the game and say that Maryland cannot hang with the way Northwestern is playing offensively.
Well, they started off really good on offense, though. I mean, they scored 4 goals in the first quarter on 5 shots. Maryland did. But then it just completely fell off. They turned the ball over 22 times, season high. And I think
that was part of the issue, is that they scored on 4 or 5 shots, and I think at the same time Northwestern had double the shots, and so at that point it was kind of this, a statistics game.
Yeah, it's a mirage at that point, right? You're converting at an insanely high rate, and Northwestern is getting double the opportunities. Emily Sterling can only do so much before it just becomes too much of an attack. And yeah, I mean, Northwestern's really, really friggin' good too. I don't think that should be lost in the fact that they look like the best team in the country. And we've talked a lot about how Maryland's up there. I don't think this loss should take away that we still think Maryland's a national title contender. I do think it maybe signifies that there is a gap between them and the Wildcats. How big that is, I don't really know. Was this game just an anomaly? But that is 2 out of 3 they've dropped now. So we'll see what they do, how they recover. What do they got coming up, B?
Yeah, you got to really hope, if you're Maryland, that you're not on the same side of the bracket as Northwestern in the Big Ten tournament, and also
all costs.
Yeah, exactly. So 2 games coming up this week. 8th ranked Johns Hopkins. Like I say all the time, Maryland's never lost to Johns Hopkins. 25-0 all time, and Johns Hopkins, pretty similar resume to Maryland. They have 3 losses, so does Maryland, but they have losses to Penn and Northwestern, and Maryland does too. Again, it's going to be a 1-goal game. Just looking at it, Saturday, Penn State. Penn State kind of plays the way that Maryland wants to play, much more of a low-scoring approach to try to win games. But they've been very all over the place. They've had they beat Northwestern, but they also lost to Drexel. So you don't really know what you're going to get against them. And like them, games that have also been close, they've played pretty well. And so it's going to be interesting. And the fact that they beat Northwestern shows they can beat any team in the country.
Let's stick with the low scoring theme and talk about the men's lacrosse team. They did prevail though in their weekend game against Ohio State, winning 8-7. The number 6 Terps just really locked in on the defensive side. We talked a lot about offensive struggles. They had those. But the difference was that Maryland's defense was excellent against the Buckeyes. Logan McNanny, just a phenomenal performance. According to the Diamondback, he had a 58.5% save percentage. That snapped his streak of 5 games with a rate below 50%. And when we talk about lacrosse, anything above a 50% save percentage is very, very good. So he was excellent. And the defense, I think that's what this team has to rely on, right? We talk about the lack of offensive stars this year, but the best player on this team is Ajax Zapatello. He lies on the defensive side. They have experience and talent there. That's how they're going to have to win games.
You could kind of look at it going into this game that this wasn't going to be a ridiculously overpowering performance for Maryland offensively. Didn't have Daniel Maltz. He'd scored in every game up until that point. He's still scored in every game that he's played. And like you said, Sam, the defense is the reason that Maryland won this game. Without an incredible defensive performance, only allowing 7 goals, Maryland would not obviously won. Eric Spanhouse had 4 goals and then 2 goals from long stick middies, which I don't think anybody was really expecting going into the game. But that was one of those games where it's got to do anything you can to win. And Maryland, fortunate for them, was able to come out with the win. Looking ahead to this weekend, Maryland will take on Rutgers. Rutgers so far has had 4 games within 3 goals. Any game that's been that close, they've won, but all their losses have been absolute blowout. So it's not really the style that Maryland's going to want to play, where Maryland wants to get ahead early and kind of just do a bunch of scoring, which isn't really their MO. So it'll be interesting to see how this game goes, and I think we could see another very, very low scoring game, kind of like we saw against Ohio State.
It's just been the theme of all Maryland sports, apparently, and that's going to potentially continue next year with the men's basketball team. They do have a little more firepower coming back next year, if you want to call it that. Friend of the pod, Jordan Geronimo, is announced that he is returning. The senior forward will be coming back to College Park for his second year. I think Jordan Geronimo, Mike, is a quality piece if he's placed in the right role. It has to be in the right role, though. You cannot be having Jordan Geronimo. I know you were high on him as your start. Sorry, this has just turned into a Cook Mike's preseason takes podcast, but you can't have him be your starting power forward, I don't think, right? I mean, what do we think his role is going to be this year?
Yeah, I tend to get very optimistic, but if he's just a high energy guy coming off the bench, can grab you some boards, play some strong defense, get some offensive rebounds, second chance points, that's perfect. Like, that's what he was born to play. But if you put him in as a starting small forward, then you're going to have no shooting. So I think with the projected starting lineup there is right now, we have Gillespie, Rice, DHS, Julian Reese, Derek Queen. That's pretty darn good. ESPN thinks it was good. It's in the not too early top 25. But I still think there's a little bit of shooting issues there. If you've got Reese, DHS, and Queen all in the same lineup. No? Am I anybody else thinking that?
I don't know, Mike. Unless this guy is in love with getting his degree at Maryland, he has to think that he's going to be a starter next season, because why else would he come back?
Does he have really that much of a basketball career outside of college? Maybe he just wants to.
Makes good sense. And also, some guys don't want to go play for like a low D1. He's not Jordan Geronimo. Most high major programs isn't going to start, right? Like, so why would you leave in a team you know you're going to play a role on and you feel comfortable with to then, unless he wanted to go play for a low major school and score 15 a game because he's way too athletic, I understand why he stayed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we'll see what happens with the actual starters next year, and it's very possible he starts games early on. I mean, he started a ton of games this past season, so I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see who else Maryland gets in the portal, and that will probably depend if he starts or not.
Staying on the portal talk, Brenda Fries had her sixth freshman in the past 2 years transfer out. It was Hala Demboya this week. It's a very concerning trend, to say the least. Sam, what do you think about
that? Yeah. It is, I think, concerning. And
Sam's at a loss for words.
On one hand, I understand, the freshman leaving. It's college basketball now. If you don't play a lot of minutes, you're probably leaving your school, right? So that I'm not saying that this is just a Brenda Fries issue. But I am saying that the top programs in the Big Ten, your boy was doing some digging last night on some research. Guess how many average transfers how many Division I, so Power 5 schools have combined between Iowa, Indiana, and Ohio State. So the top 3 teams in the conference, basically, this year. How many transfers that have left those 3 schools have went to Power 5 programs over the past 5 years? How many will we guess? Maryland's number, I think, is 13 I put out there. And it's likely going to be 14 or 15 now this year.
So you're saying the schools that you mentioned combined, how many?
How many?
Have gone to other Power 5 schools. I wonder if it's going to be really low. I don't know. I'm going to guess combined, I'm going to guess 27.
15?
You both were wrong. It's 12.
Why is that? Like, what is the reasoning for that?
I don't know. I guess that's the problem. I should be doing my job better. But I think that part of it is Maryland doesn't play freshmen and players leaving. Part of it was that weird season when Ashley Owusu, Angel Reese, and those players left. That boosts the numbers for sure. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, like, you can't lose Riley Nelson to the portal, and you just lost a promising, forward that now this team next year, guys, has A, 5 scholarship players that are currently healthy, and B, 1 forward on the roster who played meaningful minutes last year. And both forwards on the roster have had 2 major leg surgeries. Both of them have had 2. Emma Chardon and Allie Kubek. Demboya might not have played this last year, but at least she provided some depth. And Brenda Fries has some work to do in the transfer portal. That's all I'll say. There needs to be a serious revamping of this roster, or else Maryland could be like legitimately bad next season. Like if there's not some serious high level talent, Shy and Bree McDaniel are great, right? Like very proven, all Big Ten level guards. Other than that, like yeah, it's tough. So I don't want to cast judgment until the portal season's over because maybe Brenda just has a bunch of names that she's looking at. But right now, as it stands, not great.
And then, Sam, looking at some other transfers, someone who's transferring up to the D1 level who committed a couple months ago now, Itzi Asi Mamadou tore her ACL. What do you know about that? And do you think she'll be able to play next year?
Yeah, I watched some of her game. I would expect a transition level, like, and probably, obviously transitioning to a higher level of basketball and also transitioning off the ACL. I wouldn't expect much, and anything that she provides is probably an added bonus. If Brenda Fries relies on her to play major minutes, which I don't think she will, that's a troubling sign, I would say.
And then before we get to football, just a quick note about gymnastics, which I forgot to mention earlier. Emma Silverman will be the first gymnast since 2001 to attend nationals. She's going for vault. So that's a big positive for the program and a good way to send out the fifth year for Maryland. Okay, but enough about gymnastics. Football, Sam, you were at practice this weekend. What'd you see?
Yeah, it was cold. My eyes were watering, but they weren't watering enough to not make some observations. Maryland practiced at Morgan State and kind of in a very cool crossover event. I thought a little maybe like, this is just kind of for show, but especially with everything Baltimore's gone through recently, I thought it was a really, really strong effort by Coach Loxley and the program to kind of, continue to make the grassroots around the state. But enough of all that flowery talk. Let's talk football. The Terps, the big thing everybody wants to know is the quarterback battle, right? And Cam Edge, Billy Edwards, and MJ Morris. I want to ask you guys really quick, if you had to put money on it right now, what would you say the rankings are, or where they stand? I don't think that means that it's over, but like best guess right now.
If I had to give a guess, I'd probably go Billy 1 because he has a prior starting experience, Cam 2 because he's been at Maryland, and then MJ 3.
I don't know. I'm going to say something pretty similar. I think Billy 1 just because of the reps we saw him get in the bowl this past season and the length he's been on the team and the length he's been in college. So Billy 1, I'll go Morris 2, and then Cam Edge 3. But we talked to him. He seems like he likes to prove people wrong. So he'll probably be the starter, honestly. Sam, you probably know best because you were at practice.
Yeah.
Any insight on what you saw there? I mean,
yeah, the top
was it
two
shared reps or?
Mike is on it. The top two, I would flip those. I'd say Cam Edge was probably taking the most first team reps, but it was very close with him and Billy. Like they split time and rotated pretty heavily. Now, Loxley rotated all the quarterbacks because he knew it was an open practice, obviously. And I do think he's still trying to find who's the best guy. But it was very clearly a two-man race is what I'll say. MJ Morris did not impress me. He missed a lot of throws. He didn't look like he was in command of the offense. He had Josh Gaddis not pleased a couple times. It wasn't a good showing, particularly from the NC State transfer. And that's not to say that it can't happen, but right now, at the very least, it doesn't look good. Some other observations that I made real quick about the offense. Then I want to hear out of all of these, which is the most important to you guys as Terrapin observers. For one, position change. They're moving a starting D lineman who played a lot of games last year, 11 in fact. They decided to move Isaac Bunyan from defensive line to offensive line. He started at offensive guard, so an interesting mix-up there. Kind of depends how you look at it if they're moving a D lineman to O-line who played a lot. The starters were Edge and Edwards at quarterback, Roman Hemby, Caden Prather, Octavian Smith, Ty Felton, Dylan Wade, who Preston Howard missed practice. But Dylan Wade looks really good, guys. Like, really friggin' good. Had some great catches, looked physical. I expect this tight end room to be better than it was last year when people were very high on Maryland's tight ends. So that's
I don't know. CJ Dupree ain't walking through that door, Sam.
Or Corey Deitch, as a matter of fact. But both those guys, I think, could have a really nice really nice season. And then defensively, the run defense, they only played one live period of full contact, but the run defense looked really strong, wasn't giving Maryland much room to operate. The new secondary coach, Azar Abdul Rahim, was coaching up. I thought the DBs were very impressive. Glendon Miller and Dante Trader look like a really nice safety duo. And then I think the Perry Fisher looks like a pretty sticky cornerback. So I'd expect a pretty solid DB room heading into the year. And the pass rush was horrendous. Now, granted, it's spring practice. There's not a lot of contact, but it didn't look very good. So that was a lot to throw at you guys. I know, I'm sorry, I maybe wasn't succinct enough, but out of all of those, is there anything that stands out to you?
You didn't mention Champ Long.
Is that what stood out, Mike?
Dylan Wade, that sounds very promising. The tight end position, obviously losing Deichus left a huge question mark there. But if you have a two-headed monster there with Howard and Wade, it's pretty good offensive weapons when you add in the wide receivers they have.
I don't know how much stock to really put in the offensive line comments, but that's weird. Moving someone from defensive line to offensive line, you have to think that he's going to be really good, because why else would you do that? But that does have to kind of scare you to think that, offensive line probably needs a lot of help.
Shout out Sam Jane, investigative reporter. Mike, toot my own horn, Mike Loxley gave me a shout out for noticing that in the press conference. But he also kind of answered your question, B, a little. He said he thought that this guy, that Bunyan had, quote, pro potential at O-line. Could have been just media talk. I actually tend to agree with you. I think that they're going to be in the market for a portal O-lineman once spring season kind of fully kicks into effect.
Well, that would make a little more sense. Thank you very much to my investigative reporter, Sam Jane, and to the Maryland football head coach, Mike Loxley. With all that being said, terrific Terp, should we do it? All right, let's do it. We'll keep it on the topic of football, and we'll go. This week's Terrific Terp was not only a star with the football in his hand, but he was also a star in the operating room. Dr. Stanford Levine led Maryland to a Gator Bowl victory in 1950 as quarterback. Levine was a Pittsburgh native, and he was planning to attend the University of Pittsburgh, but the coach that recruited him had been hired as head coach at Maryland after Bear Bryant resigned in 1945. At Maryland, Levine had the longest touchdown pass in program history at 92 yards, which was in 1949. By the end of college, Levine had cemented himself as a successful quarterback and a man pursuing a medical degree. He stayed within the medical system at the University of Maryland and got his degree in Baltimore in 1954. After some time with the Air Force, Levine came back to College Park to serve as the team's physician in the 1960s. That led him to a string of jobs with DC sports teams, first as a physician of the Bullets in 1971, and then the Commanders in 1976. In 1972, he was also the president of the Washington Orthopedic Society, and for a period of time, he was orthopedist for both sports teams and DC and for the University of Maryland. He allowed some very famous athletes in the area like Wes Unseld and Sonny Jurgensen to extend their careers after some injuries. Levine is in the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame of Western Pennsylvania, the Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame, and most notably out of those two, this week's Terrific Terp.
Always love a good Jewish Hall of Fame Terrific Terp. That always warms my heart. And I'm sure it warms the heart of all of Terps fans to know that we continue to provide the best podcast content for Maryland fans. You can find all of our stuff at Under the Shell, Twitter, not Facebook. Don't go to Facebook. It's a dead website. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube.
We do have it on Facebook, though. We do have it on Facebook.
God damn, Mike. Look at that. Mike coming in for the rescue. For anybody who wants to go to Facebook, you can go there. I've always said it's a website that's been alive, popping to this day, is one of the most famous ones you can find. But yeah, you can find us at Apple, Spotify there too. Watch us on YouTube. We continue to pump out content, and we'll continue to get great interviews for you. We have a loaded slate coming up, including potentially an in-person interview that has a very specific meaning to our name. That'll be a fun one, and a special episode dropping at the end of the year too. So you can find all of that at this podcast. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your night. Listen to Under the Shell.
Guess what? You got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.